All right. I'm Lynn Crump, and I'm going to kind of kick off this visual resource track as well as this session today. So thank you all for coming. We will go over some of the technical aspects and some of the general aspects about this. So as some of you may know from the beginning, I am the co-host, one of the co-hosts for this 2021 Virtual River Management Society Symposium. I'm in Richmond, Virginia. I work for the Department of Conservation and Recreation. I'm a landscape architect, and I'm involved with scenic resources here in Virginia. I'm honored to welcome you all here this week to participate in numerous opportunities to learn, share, and contribute. I will be the primary moderator for the Visual Resource Management track, and this track is a unique opportunity to bring visual resources and rivers together. The purpose of this track is, one, to familiarize attendees with the language of visual inventory and impacts, to discuss why visual inventories, quality ratings, and assessments are done, and to introduce different visual inventory methods, as well as to introduce how to develop partnerships to use inventories in more effective ways for land conservation. The 4-day visual resource management track includes nearly 20 fabulous professionals who have graciously agreed to present their expertise on visual resources, impacts, and mitigation. We have representatives from federal agencies who work with visual resources daily and are here to share their different perspectives. These agencies are the Bureau of Land Management, the National Park Service, and the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. We also have representatives from regional planning and local and regional land trusts, as well as private industry. Each one of these stellar professionals will provide a unique perspective and an in-depth understanding of visual resources. Today, Monday, is focused on why scenic resources is important and what the vocabulary is used in scenic and visual resource discussions. Over the next 4 days, we will talk about various protocols for assessing visual resources. Additionally, we will discuss visual resource importance of rivers and communities and the incorporation of visual resources in planning, permitting, and mitigation. We hope you stay with us and enjoy all the sessions. Please note that after today, there are keynote speakers every day, and the VRM track is scheduled to be part of those collective sessions with common breaks. Tomorrow, first thing, will be a keynote presentation on how the James River, the host river city, went from a sewer to a park. On Wednesday, we will start off with a keynote presentation on the Anacostia River's Renaissance. And at the end of the day, there will be a virtual walk through the rich history of Richmond's James River, conducted by the National Park Service. The keynote on Thursday will be after the silent and live auctions, and I encourage all of you to go to the silent auction page and see the fabulous things we have. And it will cover the revitalization of waterways as a stream to environmental justice. I hope that you all will take part in these rich opportunities to learn and participate in the 2021 River Management Society Symposium. So let me go over a few logistics as we get started. All our sessions are going to be recorded. All the VRM track will be eligible for LACES and American Trail educational credits. And hopefully all those who are interested have signed up for those credits already. There may be questions to you from your speakers. And if you don't know how to raise your hand or comment on that, you float your cursor to the bottom of the screen, and there is a section called reactions, and you can respond that way. But during the presentation, please feel free to share any questions or concerns that you may have in the chat box. All participants will be muted and their videos will be turned off once the speakers started. And as the time allows, we'll address each and every question as best we can. As a note, that as being part of the Guidebook Symposium, participants have direct contact with other participants and all the speakers throughout the symposium. So please look at that and take advantage of that opportunity. There will be a 2-minute warning chime for every speaker right before the end of the session, so listen for that. And during the breaks, we are encouraged to go to the lobby for pertinent information and information from our sponsors. If you have any questions throughout any of the days, that's the place to go for live answers. You're always encouraged to check out the silent auction, as I mentioned before, and that can be done at any time, day or night, during the conference or not. Now, if there are not any questions, and I don't see any in the chat box, we will begin the Visual Resource Management track section for 2021 River Management Society Symposium. As the coordinator for this track, one of the coordinators, I have to thank all of the speakers that have contributed to this and have been a part of it, especially John McCarty of BOEM, who made a lot of the connections for us for moving forward with this. And also Mark Myers has done a terrific help in all of this. But I want, as most of you may know, we experience scenic areas in many different ways, and people talk about them in many different ways. And so one of the things that we want to recognize in this effort is that scenic areas produce many benefits, both for individuals, communities, and local economies. Some of the benefits for individuals are improved moods and pleasant feelings, more productivity, and a reduction in anger, fear, and stress. It also contributes to the physical well-being by reducing blood pressure, heart rates, muscle tension, and the production of stress hormones. For vibrant communities, scenery can produce a sense of place, a base for community pride, and be an economic driver for attracting visitors and businesses. With all of this said, it's not easy to codify scenic assets for enhancement, protection, or management. And these are some of the issues that we're going to be talking about over the next several days. During this course and tract, we'll be looking at opportunities, challenges, and legal implications of visual resources and visual resource management. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Leighton Powell, the Executive Director of Scenic Virginia, as she introduces you to the importance of scenic areas as exemplified in Virginia. Leighton, please take over.
Can anyone see that? Can you hear me? Great. Greetings, river enthusiasts. I'm Leighton Powell, and I serve as the Executive Director of Scenic Virginia, the only statewide nonprofit dedicated solely to preserving, protecting, and enhancing the scenic beauty of our Commonwealth. It's my pleasure to be here today and to welcome you virtually to our beautiful Virginia. I was so looking forward to seeing you in person last year, and that didn't happen. And so I want to give you a taste of the incredible bounty of scenic and visual resources that Virginia has to offer, all in the hope that you'll make plans to visit when traveling is safe again. Virginia's scenic resources are incredible. In fact, when I tell someone that I'm from Virginia, the immediate response is always, it's so beautiful there. True, our Commonwealth is also rich in history and culture, but its scenic beauty is what most people mention first. This world-renowned scenic beauty is undeniable. And what is particularly striking, and what makes Virginians so lucky to call Virginia our home, is the depth and breadth of scenic beauty that exists here. We have it all. Gorgeous coastal lands, amazing waterways. This is the York River. Rustic landscapes, glorious rivers, and the habitat they attract. Magnificent mountains and incredible valleys, urban vistas, and rural country roads. It's all here in Virginia. And as Virginia moves toward the future, Virginians need to take a moment to recognize what we stand to lose if care is not taken. Our Commonwealth is at a crossroads regarding its scenic beauty, and we must take steps now to ensure that our incredible scenic assets are not lost. First, though, I want to give you a brief snapshot of how we got here in the hope that it might be useful to groups in other states. President Lyndon B. Johnson's 1965 White House Conference on Natural Beauty, which he convened at the behest of his wife, Lady Bird Johnson, represented the height of the scenic movement in the modern era. In his remarks to the conference attendees, President Johnson stated, "Natural beauty is more than a rich source of pleasure and recreation. It shapes our values, it molds our attitudes, it feeds our spirit, and it helps to make us the kind of men and women that we finally become. And the kind of men that we finally become, in turn, makes this great nation." One of the White House Conference attendees was a young Virginia state senator named Fitzgerald Bemis. Impassioned and empowered by what he saw and heard, Jerry Bemis returned to Richmond, Virginia, and called for the creation of a new Virginia Outdoor Recreation Study Commission, which he served as chair, and which began meeting to consider such issues as our Commonwealth's scenic roads and its scenic rivers, and to carefully consider the question, will there be places to play in 2020? In asking the question, State Senator Bemis noted that Virginia's distinct regions, Tidewater, Piedmont, and Appalachian, offer great beauty, variety, and natural wealth. One outcome of the Commission's work was the 1965 publication of a statewide outdoors recreation plan called Virginia's Commonwealth. Its cover features Captain John Smith's well-loved quote that heaven and earth never agreed to frame a better place for man's habitation than Virginia, and we agree. The outdoor program legislation called for the preservation, development, and protection of Virginia's open spaces, resulting in the creation of new state agencies, including the Department of Historic Resources, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, yay, and the Virginia Outdoors Foundation, as well as new programs for scenic byways and Virginia Scenic Rivers, which, as you know, celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2020. Speaking of scenic rivers, Scenic Virginia dedicated the Rivers and Waterways category of our 2020 Virginia Vistas photo contest to designated scenic rivers. This photo was our special category winner, and it's of the North Landing River in Virginia Beach. Our judges also selected 6 honorable mentions. These include photos of the Upper Rappahannock, the Maury, the St. Mary's, the North Landing, Goshen Pass along the Maury, and the Rappahannock near Fredericksburg. So, scenic beauty matters. Identifying and providing recognition of scenic resources such as these is at the heart of Scenic Virginia's new program, one that I look forward to telling you about later today. For now, here's my contact information. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, Leighton. I really appreciate that introduction. And we're going to go into our next section. We have 3 professionals representing 3 different organizations to talk about why it matters and what's involved in Scenic Virginia. And I'm going to introduce Karla Rogers right now from the Bureau of Land Management. Karla, please share your screen.
Hi, Lynn. Thanks to you and Leighton for that introduction. That's very inspiring. I love the pictures. And thank you for the opportunity to speak to this year's symposium attendees alongside John and Mark. The next few days will be really jam-packed with a lot of information So to set the stage for what is to come, I'll just take a few minutes to look back to provide a context for scenery management in the US in hopes that it enriches our united purpose together here today. Oh, okay, so protecting the quality of scenic values, including those related to rivers, isn't new. In fact, advocacy to protect scenic beauty in the US began over 100 years ago, as far back as the national settlements, and people have made it clear that lands, including natural beauty, are important. So we stand on many people's shoulders who also work to prioritize natural scenery as part of the American legacy. Now, our work here this week to discuss the natural scenic beauty as part of river management continues to build this legacy. So I'll start off by looking at how Scenic became part of US legislation and part of the work that we do. Mark Myers from the National Park Service will talk about the value that it brings, and John McCarty from BOEM will end with a look toward the future. So looking back in the 1800s, we could see public concerns about scenery rising. So during this time, Americans' national and political confidence was up after having weathered the test of the American Revolutionary War and the Civil War. There was a shift in thought from being an extension of Europe to having our own American identity. And the future was a growing thought. Ideas of legacy, inheritance, prosperity, and well-being were part of many social discussions. People like George Perkins Marsh and Franklin Hoff began raising concerns about how their generation would be known and how they were leaving the land asset for future generations. People were realizing a clash between a desired future vision of this country and the realities of the settlement practices. So several economically powerful industries had risen up by this time because of access to abundant natural resources with few limitations. Possible because the common mindset was that wilderness was worthless. So the train also came onto the scene, making it physically easier to penetrate deeper into the wilderness and carry more materials faster than ever before in this field concern. Influential voices and images began appearing in popular periodicals, voices like Henry David Thoreau, and images like those from the Hudson River School of Artists worked to unite the national identity with landscape scenery. And during this time, we see the rise of citizen groups organizing to advocate for places. Niagara Falls was a hallmark effort in that. Resulting from all this, we see the US government beginning to organize itself around lands and uses. We also see the first laws to protect places. So Yellowstone National Park in 1872 and Yosemite and Sequoia National Parks in 1890. So by the early 1900s, the role of lands as part of the American identity really was beginning to gel. We start seeing the words natural scenic beauty appear in things from conference proceedings to debates, popular literature, and even the lyrics of music, like America the Beautiful. Natural scenery were part of discussions related to economy, prosperity, well-being, heritage, and legacy. Americans were enjoying nature tourism enabled by the Model T, and nature writing, a new American-based literature genre. It was popularized by John Meyer. And these things influenced public ideas about nature that translated into public support and concern. Two ideologies were emerging, and both were centered around President Teddy Roosevelt, or he was at the center of both of these. One focused on a need to preserve and protect places, and the other focused on conservation and wise use of lands and natural resources. So natural scenic beauty was part of both ideologies. It was a common ground. Of note during this time was a benchmark event, a conference of governors in 1908. It was sponsored by President Teddy Roosevelt and was organized by Gifford Pinchot, who you may recognize as the first director of the U.S. Forest Service. The conference was focused on natural resources, but the proceedings included a paper by George Coons, entitled "The Preservation of Scenic Beauty." The inclusion of this topic at this conference clearly indicates that natural scenic beauty was recognized and a subject of importance alongside subjects of water, air, and forests. So as a result, the consolidation of forestry responsibilities happened. So we have the current day U.S. Forest Service. It was established in 1905. The Antiquities Act of 1906 designated 32 places by 1916, when we got the National Park Service to watch over them. And a Reorganization Act of 1945 created the Bureau of Land Management. All of these agencies now have scenery management programs, and they're tied to their organic acts. So before moving past this time period, I want to go back to that Conference of Governors of 1908 and read just this quote from the paper by George Coons. So we have seen that there is no more valuable agency than that of the scenic beauty of forests, of the mountains, and of the rivers and their banks toward the creation of an aesthetic taste and a love of the beautiful in the average mind. For this reason, such objects of natural beauty should be carefully guarded from injury or destruction. So the third time period that I would like to talk about followed the Great Depression and the American Dust Bowl and World War II. We see interest and efforts for natural scenic beauty reviving as part of the post-war boom. Major influencers, including Lawrence Rockefeller and Lady Bird Johnson, and the political support of President Lyndon B. Johnson. These people hosted a White House conference on natural beauty in 1965, which Leighton just spoke about. And this was another benchmark on the importance of this subject to Americans. So in this same era, the public was influenced by contrasts between growing global affluence, overshadowed by the Korean and Vietnam Wars, not to mention the Cold War with Russia. The space race was on, and an iconic image of Earth rising above the moon, taken by Apollo 8, was awe-inspiring. Seeing the Earth in the middle of so much nothingness invigorated strong advocacy for protecting Earth's environment. So new legislation resulted. Many of the laws included words like scenic. Here is a list of key legislations resulting from this era. These laws give authority to federal agencies, especially public land agencies, to manage scenic resources. And the process to manage scenic resources includes conducting visual analysis. So as I hand this over to Mark Meyer to talk about scenic value, take a look at this word cloud. It was created from laws established since 1973 that include the word scenic. The size of the word is based on the frequency that it appears. Scenic was the search term, so of course it's the largest, but the second most common word happened to be rivers. The reason this should matter to you is these laws provide us authority to hold both the U.S. government and entities proposing land modifying projects on public lands to be accountable. These laws are our teeth, so being familiar with them is critical to the success of all efforts to protect scenic values. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Karla. So that was a pretty long list of laws. There's a lot of them, but what really happens? That's what really matters. A couple of primary indicators that you can see here, air and water quality show that things have gotten much better. Many rivers that were essentially, as mentioned before, where open sewers for industrial and city waste are much cleaner. The air in many cities is much cleaner. However, I think everybody would agree that there's still a lot of improvements to be made. So it's really not time to start easing up on, certainly reducing pollution that was, started with some of those laws. Next slide. So federal agencies and communities also really started to step up to the challenge. Though the laws such as the National Trails Act and Wild and Scenic Rivers Act include the first designations of those networks, they've really continued to grow. And the numbers you see here are relatively current through 2019. And these don't even begin to cover state and local designations for rivers, trails, and scenic roads, Forest Service scenic roads, BLM backcountry byways. So there's a whole myriad of, recreation opportunities that are started by these beginning acts back in the 70s and 80s. Next slide. And as they started to really understand how to manage these features, federal agencies needed to find ways to protect the settings where they occur, or otherwise risk reducing their value. The MPOS program is a work in progress, and BOEM is getting a program in place as offshore wind is emerging as a major use, offshore. But BLM and Forest Service were real early in this game. Their programs date back in, started development back in the 70s and 80s. And, they both have comprehensive management plans that include inventory, management planning, mitigation, and the whole myriad that you would put into a program. They're both multi-use agencies. That's really critical because there's a lot of competing interests for those landscapes: mining, timber production, grazing, energy development, in addition to recreation. So those programs were designed, really not to stop that development, but we're really trying to make sure that all those activities do a better job at maintaining the visual values of those landscapes. Next slide. One just real quick, easy example is energy development, especially in the West. This took time to gain, some industry buy-in, but now it's a regular part of the way that they do business. And, certainly some would argue that there's, still room for improvement, as there is with any program. But, that's true of most everything we're going to talk about in the coming days. There's always room to do more and stuff. But you can see here, just the change in the way that, the business is done on the landscape can really make a difference. Next slide. And I mentioned communities a bit earlier as well, as far as stepping up to protect the visual landscape, and that's because it's really important to them as well. Many of the programs, such as National Trails, Wild and Scenic Rivers, the Scenic Byways, are community driven to get new trails and rivers added. And even more critically, the communities are critical in supporting those designations through volunteer groups that help manage and maintain those designations. In many areas, particularly in the West, public lands really can function as the backyards of communities. The lands are important for recreation, property values, and their whole quality of life. And collaboration among those communities with agencies helps make sure that the landscape can be protected, while really helping those communities thrive. Collaboration can be even more critical in areas where public lands are minimal. Next slide. As you can see, this map shows the federally protected areas that are primarily in the West, but there are some scattered in the East as well. And now you can see that there's some large blocks in some areas, but there's also a lot of space. There's a lot of, little dots on the map, and those spaces in between those protected areas become really critically important. In the East, there's a little bit, certainly less federal protected areas. And that's where these collaboration processes are really critical in protecting the shared value in those visual landscapes that are important to the surrounding communities. Next slide. And of course, one of the big reasons is economics. These numbers show that the economic impact of recreation and associated with federal land, but these numbers are not that important. The actual numbers are not critical, except they change every year. But you can see it's a pretty substantial amount. And I think more important is the message that you can be assured that many states, counties, and local communities also have similar analysis. I mean, there's real value in protecting the visual landscape beyond just having a nice place to live. And I think at this point, we're going to turn it over to John. He's going to talk about a bit of some of the new challenges and opportunities ahead.
Hi, thanks, Mark. I'm John McCarty, a landscape architect with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management for the past year. But before BOEM, I was the chief landscape architect with the Bureau of Land Management for about 14 years. So a lot of my perspective comes from those years with the BLM. Mark touched on a little bit on the conventional energy development, but apart from the long-standing development of North American fossil fuels, which is typically more at a human scale with facilities that, and I'm talking mostly about oil and gas here, but facilities that rarely rise above 20 feet, although can occupy large acreages, is the new challenge of renewable energy sources, which comes with a much larger and far-reaching visual footprint on the landscape. Next slide, please. Two principles that I'd like to note today is that all lands have scenic value, some more than others, but all lands have scenic value, as demonstrated by the scenic resource inventory procedures practiced by both the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Forest Service, as well as the National Park Service. And as I mentioned, my experience with the BLM for the past 14 years or so, I've spent a lot of time reviewing and participating in the inventories of millions of acres on BLM land, inventorying their scenic values, and never found a situation where the landscape was found to not have scenic value. Again, some have more scenic value than others, but all lands have scenic value. Next, please. And regardless of the scenic quality of a particular landscape, what often matters is protecting its scenic integrity, which is often attached to the importance people assign to landscape. Scenic integrity is different than scenic quality. Scenic quality describes the character and the scenic variety that the landscape has to offer, where integrity is talking about the intactness of the landscape, its natural character, and keeping it intact. So in many of these landscapes have special qualities that we spend time celebrating these special qualities and the unique settings they have to offer. Next, please. The second principle I want to put out there for everybody to ponder is that scenery is a finite resource. The more features we place into the landscape, the higher the potential for lessening the scenic value. So scenic value plays a very important role in land use decisions that change the scenic character and thereby affect the scenic value. Whether it's oil and gas, wind, solar energy development, geothermal, or routing, electrical transmission and lines and pipelines to the landscape, even recreation facilities that we place on the landscape in support of our river activities. Next slide, please. And while this symposium is focused on land-based onshore development and managing onshore development in the context of managing for scenic experiences along the river corridors, I want to share a new frontier of scenic resource management, which is offshore, as Mark mentioned, offshore energy development, renewable energy specifically off the U.S. Outer Continental Shelf. BOEM is now a new player in the arena of scenery management. A couple of weeks ago, President Biden announced a goal of 30 gigawatts of offshore renewable energy by the year 2030, generating enough power to meet the demand of 10 million American homes and avoid 78 million metric tons of CO2 emissions. while at the same time protecting the biodiversity the ocean provides and promoting co-use of the ocean. The U.S. Department of Energy further indicates that the U.S. could install up to 3 times that, almost 3 times that, 86 gigawatts of offshore energy production by 2050, placing a reliable energy source close to our highest concentration of national populations and energy consumers. According to the American Wind Energy Association, roughly 80% of Americans live within 200 miles of the coast. So this places our energy development very close to the energy consumption, which is kind of unique in the US. The coastline already serves many values and functions to the country, including ports and shipping lanes to move import and export commerce, international destinations for vacationing and tourism, marine life and fisheries, terrestrial and marine archaeology. And I've always thought of marine archaeology as being shipwrecks, sunken ships, but it's much more than that. And U.S. national defense, and also the unparalleled value of residential real estate. So adding offshore renewable energy to an already busy environment has unique challenges when addressing visual impacts and how these visual impacts affect large coastal areas and communities over a very long range of distances. Next slide, please. On this slide, the central portion of it shows the current undertaking that BOEM has, that we're facing. It lists the number of lease sales, the leases that have been issued, the status of development applications. However, what I really want to bring attention to is on the edges where we have the maps of the Atlantic coast to the right and the Pacific coast to the left. And you can see the spatial requirements it's going to, it requires to be able to host the kind of renewable energy potential that we're talking about here. And this is the first wave of leasing. So it gives you an indication of the magnitude of the spatial requirement to deliver what's being called for. So you may ask what the relationship is between onshore and offshore energy development. And a question that really didn't come to my mind until preparing for this presentation is a question that could offshore development lead to a reduction of onshore pressure for land-based energy development, especially as we're keeping in mind how these can and may, and especially these large scale renewable energy projects, can encroach into our river environments. It's easy to separate these, and especially when you think that 2 different agencies are managing, one's managing offshore and the other one's managing onshore. But perhaps they should be considered together to fully understand the benefits and trade-offs, including you see, sorry for I lost my train. I noticed my clock had stopped. Anyway, it's easy to separate these two given the 2 agencies that are involved in it. But what we really need to do is look at it in unison to fully understand the benefits and the trade-offs, including scenic value and deciding where is the best place to construct energy production facilities. Next slide, please. On a clear day, which admittedly along the coastline is not common, the U.S. Department of Energy, Oregon National Laboratory, has conducted visibility research in the United Kingdom to conclude that offshore wind turbines can be seen as far off as 24 miles, unlike onshore where that threshold is roughly about 33 miles. So the viewing distance is a little bit less because of the atmospheric conditions. However, that research, when it was done, the wind turbines were around 550 feet. They're now much taller. The applications we're reviewing now, the wind turbines are approaching 850 feet. And in the applications, the building envelope is penetrating the 1,000-foot level in anticipation of new wind energy turbine technology that's leading to higher megawatt output and therefore taller wind turbines to create a longer sweep to generate that energy. Offshore energy development may affect the ocean views from commercial centers along the coast, historic villages that we all enjoy, the beaches we play on, and the sacred spaces we have. So the question again comes up, How does the presence of that ocean view contribute to the scenic qualities of these onshore areas? And how do changes in the onshore view affect the onshore experience? Does it detract? Does it enhance it? Are we indifferent about it? And how do we ponder these questions? Again, I always will continue to kind of try to create this relationship. So ponder these questions when we're also looking at onshore potential. And how could offshore be an offset to onshore, or is the offshore environment much more important to us from a scenery standpoint, and therefore should the focus be onshore? Next slide, please. We also have the natural settings along the coast. It begs the same question. These areas may not have as high a visitation as the developed oceanfront, but they have special qualities that are equal to, or perhaps even more important than where the population centers are. Next slide, please. Which brings us back to where Karla got us started. Scenery matters to people, not only from the viewing pleasure, but as Lynn mentioned in her presentation, also for the health benefits. Frederick Law Olmsted, the father of American landscape architecture, recognized its value back in 1857 with his design for Central Park, which played a big role, and underpinning purpose was to create a natural environment for people within New York City to reattach and with their health in mind and improvement of their health in mind. And his, lost my train of thought here, but he also repeated this message in his management plan for Yosemite National Park in 1865, which is the quote on the screen. Olmsted's quote has an emphasis on the mental health benefit of natural settings and scenery. And today we continue to spend hundreds of millions of dollars each year to put a little bit of nature back into our built environments where natural landscapes were at one time, but now displaced. Next slide, please. So with this idea of putting nature back into the built environment comes also the idea of keeping existing natural scenes intact. Our charge this week is to share ways to protect our natural heritage and our national scenery by being cognizant of simply where we place facilities and how we fit those to the landscape. We like to say fit the facilities to the landscape as opposed to fitting the landscape to the facility. To avoid displacing important outdoor places and experiences that come along with it. You can imagine the effect it would have if that ridge line in the background had a row of wind turbines and how that would affect that quality of experience that these people are having within that landscape. So while Frederick Law Olmsted claimed that it's a scientific fact that scenery plays a role in improving and sustaining human health, modern day evidence-based medical research provides a science that underscores Mr. Olmsted's claim, but not only for mental health, but also for physical benefits as well. Next slide, please. Not just the benefits from exercise that we often associate as the health benefit of entering in these settings, but just from being there. Medical research has found that biological compounds important to human health are absent within our built environments, but are abundant in these natural settings. The act of simply breathing in a natural setting can replenish the important compounds that bolster human immunity and health resilience. I've listed here sources for evidence-based research that was provided to me 6 years ago by Naomi Sachs. You can put her name into a search engine and it will come up. And she has a reading list if this resonates with you to do your own reading and literature search. Next slide, please. So as we sit here this week in our virtual meeting room, over the next few days, we're going to review how to describe the landscape character. Mark's going to talk about that next under language of landscapes. We're going to talk about the different systems, about how to inventory visual values, how to reduce visual encroachment through basic design fundamentals, incorporating visual impact into NEPA and documents in Section 106 of the Historic Preservation Act, and for mitigating these and ways for mitigating these impacts. And also address the public sensitivities in the role of conservation easements and the land trust industry and in managing for visual resources. I've been doing this for about 14 years of hosting several and participating in multiple training sessions each year and sitting and participating in conferences and symposiums on this exact topic. And this is the first time that we've done it with the land trust industry participating. So I'm just thrilled with their sharing their important role into the mission of managing for visual resources. Next slide, please. And in addition to Leighton's comment and also Karla's, share my own quote I pulled from the transcript of the 1965 White House Conference on Natural Beauty, which is actually part of a speech that President Johnson delivered to Congress, making a commitment to holding the conference as a transition to Mark's next presentation. But for centuries, Americans have drawn strength and inspiration from beauty of our country. It would be neglectful generation indeed, indifferent alike, to which judgment of history and command of principle, which fail to preserve and extend such heritage for its descendants. With that, I'll hand it back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John and Mark and Karla. It's every time I hear this stuff, I always learn something new. You guys are great at pulling that together and sharing all that you all have in all of your experiences. We have another 10 minutes or so if there are questions from the audience. If not, I'm going to pose one or two just as a sort of a re-editing of sort of what you all have talked about. And so it doesn't seem like there's going to be any right away. All of those who are here, go ahead and turn on your cameras. We'd love to see you. We'd love to hear what you have to say. But my first question is going to be, so you've talked about a lot of agencies and a lot of federal laws and bills that have passed over the decades. So can you talk about which ones, where the sort of clumping of those laws were? Because there were some back in the 1900s, early 1900s, late 1800s, and then there was kind of a drag, and then there was another big clump of laws that were passed between the 60s and 70s. So can someone, you know, sort of maybe pull those together and give us an idea again about what those were? Or Karla, I think you were the one that talked about it for a bit, and so maybe you could address some of that.
Yes, I was putting together like a timeline. So I'm quickly trying to find my timeline, and maybe I can kind of share it because it does a nice job of succinctly answering your question. And for some reason, it's not coming up so quick. So those three time periods in the 1800s, it was kind of later 1800s, there was a spike around advocacy for natural scenery. And it had to do with, you know, there was the advent of the train. There were certain things that were happening that were making people more aware of the changes. So Niagara Falls was the big one to look at the forest system, all the way from the giant redwoods and the cuttings that were happening there. There were fires. There was a lot of uses, consumptive type uses of our natural resources that were starting to get the popular opinion hairs up, as well as a lot of politicians. And so there was a movement, you know, with the forest at that point. We had forests in the Department of Interior. We had forests as part of USGS. We had the surveys, you know, of our lands going on at that time. We had artists out there with the land surveyors. So we had images from that, and it was coalescing into, like I said, the U.S. government setting itself up based on lands and land uses. So that's about the time that we got in the later 1800s that we got Department of Interior, we got the Department of Agriculture, the General Land Office to control that. But at the time, there wasn't a distinction. There was a lot of communication and documentation that always brought in beauty, scenic beauty, as part of the discussion, but it wasn't. It was like it was assumed as common knowledge. It was assumed together. It wasn't its own thing. That separation, where it was really starting to be identified as its own resource or its own quality and value, happened more towards the the 1900s, early 1900s. It was coming up in that other conference of governors, and then later in 1965. So those were kind of the three time periods, like 1870s, early 1900s during the progressive era, and then in the 60s alongside of the environmental movement. Sorry, that was kind of a long way around to get to your question.
That's all right. I think that was a really good summary. You know, I think the idea of a timeline is always an interesting thing, because then you can see where pieces line up and where they don't, and what sort of stands alone and what becomes that cluster of shift, right, in perception, ideology, and so forth, and then following up with the ideological change comes the changes in laws and bills and that kind of thing. So I feel like that's a really important thing.
Could I add a little bit?
Yeah, please.
You know, when you look at laws, and Karla brought it up, but when we do our trainings, we always emphasize really looking at what's in the law, because there are things in the law that, like Karla said, that leverages accountability from the agencies and from industry, which if the public is not the reminder of the land management consciousness, it goes unnoticed. And when it comes to rivers, I can point to the wild and scenic rivers. I can talk to for the next 5 hours about all the acts, but given that this is a river base, you know, be mindful that in the law it calls for if there is an impact to a wild and scenic river, that whoever causes that impact is required to not only mitigate that impact, but also to make enhancement to that environment, which is a unique thing. It's usually like either or, but in this case it says and therefore they link the two together. So don't forget that. That's your leverage, that if you have a transmission line crossing the river, or you have a pipeline approaching, or something else, oil and gas development along the edge, and if there are the outstanding remarkable values, include scenery, you can require mitigation. And there's stories in the BLM where things of this nature are taking place, and they're able to leverage that for a better alternative to be pursued to avoid. I mean, it's easy to mitigate, but you know, where does enhancement come in? That's a much bigger challenge on enhancing our river environments. So anyway, I don't want to take up any more time away from questions, but if you want to hear more about the other laws, I'd be happy to, and the tools within them to give it teeth and give it public teeth, accountability, I'd be happy to get into that.
Okay, we have one question that's come up, and we have like 2 minutes to cover it before we take a break, but this goes to you, John, and it says, how is the impact of wind turbines considered? Strangely, I find them a fascinating part of the landscape. That's a big question.
Yeah, and thanks for that question. It's really good. I mean, when we talk about managing for visual impacts, and when we're assessing the visual impacts, we keep in mind we're not assessing impact to visual preferences, you might say. We're not judging the aesthetics or the beauty or the intrigue of wind turbines. We're simply addressing how it creates visual contrast within the setting that's being put in and as viewed from where the public witnesses that. It doesn't get into making decisions on, like you say, I find them intriguing. I, as a professional, have an obligation to analyze that visual impact, that character change to the landscape and the visual contrast it produces. And I'm with you. I find intrigue every time I go up next to a wind turbine. I'm just in awe by the scale that they are. But in order to maintain objectivity in the NEPA analysis, which is something that we all strive for, we're looking at simply from measuring that visual contrast created by the wind turbines. Does that help?
I think so. The person who asked it, we'll see what they have to say if there's anything else. So it is 2:15, and just to remind you all, now we have a longer break. Well, no, we have a shorter break till 2:30, and we'll be in this room. So everyone, if you need to go take a break, get something to drink or whatever, we have about 15 minutes. This also gives you time to go back to the James room if you want to, and find out what there is going on there, or check out the silent auction. So we'll start promptly at 2:30. Thank you all.